we also have people from the creative industry. So we have Rushdie from House, who do a lot of performing arts, a lot of fine arts, a very cool art, supporting artists and the creative industry here in Sarawak as well. Well, I don't need to introduce Benny and Jen because you guys have their profile already, but I'm also going to get them to introduce themselves. Just really quickly for you guys benefit, Benny and Jen are really good friends of mine, and hence today is going to be quite interesting this morning because it will be just the three of us catching up, I guess, in some ways, but also having a chat about, reflecting on our time in Australia as ecosystem builders, as intermediaries as well. And at the same time, for you guys to ask questions in a safe space, ask anything you want, even question that you think are simple or you think are stupid, that's fine. Jen and Benny comes from education background. They are very nurturing, very very generous in sharing wisdom and knowledge. Benny and I spent a lot of time, just chatting about wisdom and things like that. Whereas me and Jen, I always remember Jen telling me that, Eon, I'll never hire you. And I remember that was the day that I was the most disappointed. But at the same time, it was probably the best advice that I've ever gotten. Jen at the time, I remember Jen telling me that you should use your brain for bigger things and go on to create more impactful things. And that advice really, really helped. And then guess you see where I'm at today. So, she definitely knows best. And of course, she really gave me a lot of advice, a lot of guidance, and have always said yes when I needed help or needed advice and wisdom from her. So I'm really, really happy to have both of them help us educate and also share their knowledge and wisdom with people from my hometown, bridging the Australia and Malaysia gap, and also helping, bridge that knowledge across the ocean, bringing a bit of Asia to Australia and a bit of Australia to Asia as well. So just to set the scene, feel free to ask any question that you guys want, but maybe to start us off, Benny, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Eon. I thought that was hilarious that Jan told you. I'm sure she's going to share her side of the story. That she told you that she would never hire you. So Jan did hire me, and I don't know what that says about me either. So my background, I started out mostly in alternative education settings, working outside of mainstream schools with both adolescents and adults. A good chunk of that time in my 20s was spent with Outward Bound Australia, where I did also get to travel to Outward Bound in Malaysia and Singapore, and just a really wonderful kind of personal transformational program. I did in that time a couple of projects with Jan, actually, there was one project around youth entrepreneurship, and then founding the School for Social Entrepreneurs in Australia in 2009, I came on board and worked with the team there as CEO, and did that for a few years, and then moved into a more systems, working the federal local government with a bunch of communities, and also working with a bunch of intermediary organizations in Australia, facilitating a collaboration there. More recently, I've been in the US. I'm back in Australia right now, and for the foreseeable future, this is home and this is where I love. But I would spend some time in the US, mostly around transforming nonprofit to pivot to digital, and working with social entrepreneurs there too. So excited. Yeah.
Thanks, Benny. There is some connection problem there, but I think we got most of it. Okay. And over to you, Jen, the legendary Jen.
Hi, everybody. I didn't know whether those connection problems were me or Benny, so hopefully we're all good, everybody. Well, first of all, greetings to you all, and from Australia. I'm coming to you. In Australia, we, as much as we can, traditionally acknowledge the Indigenous lands on which we are coming from. So I am coming from Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung country of the Kulin Nation in Melbourne. Naarm, Australia. And in doing that, I pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and all First Nations peoples around the world. I did hire Benny, it's true, and it was a really, really good decision. It was for the right job at the right place at the right time. And I take no responsibility for anything to do with Eon, none whatsoever. He's run his own race from the beginning. It's had nothing to do with it. I never told him not to work for me. I think I probably thought I could never pin him down long enough to work for me. It's probably what that conversation was about. But Eon, is one of the most incredible community and network and ecosystem builders that I know. So I really feel very privileged to be reconnected here with Eon and with all of you in a very, very beautiful country of Malaysia, which I've been to several times and really love. And one of the things I love about Malaysia is the kind of, certainly all the work that Eon's done and that he's told me about, is this kind of can-do attitude and this sort of innovative spirit. And your government has got behind a lot of things. And I think that's really super interesting. So I'm really happy to be here and really glad to meet you all and see all your beautiful faces. We haven't been off our island of Australia for 2 years now because of COVID, because we've decided that our country is going to be the only country in the world that has no COVID cases ever. And so we're not allowed out of school. We're not allowed out of school until there's no cases. Now it's like we're in detention. So we're all working here. And so I've had a fantastic career in Australia, but also globally in social innovation and social enterprise. And now I'm basically running my own strategic advisory and innovation practice globally and doing work with CEOs who I really respect and have high regard for. So I'm working alongside other people to help them do what they do, which has been a real gift. And then alongside that, I'm starting a new business, which is probably about my 10th new business as well in longevity, because I'm very interested, because I'm over 50 now, I'm interested in aging. So now I'm going from young people to aging, each opposite ends of the spectrum, just as interesting and just as much work and just as important work, I think. So I've got a lot of really amazing projects in youth homelessness, youth justice, transforming education. I'm chair of a couple of boards. I just got off an incredible session actually with I'm the chair of a new chair of a group called Cool Australia that does sustainability and kind of human rights education work around the world for helping teachers, giving teachers resources. So everything I do every day is amazing and exciting. It's just I wish I wasn't in my same pair of tracksuit pants and in the same room for every single day. But there we are. That's the life we're all living at the moment.
One day we might fly you to the jungle of Borneo.
Cannot wait. Cannot wait. I'm there. So that's enough about me. Back to you, Eon.
Actually, Jen, it was interesting because I think a lot of people here they hear about the acknowledgement of the traditional owners of the land for the very first time. So maybe to give context, do you want to explain the tradition of acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and why do we do that in Australia as well?
It's quite recent that we all do it. And I think we took a lead from both Canada and New Zealand, actually, who have always been very progressive in this way. In fact, if you go to New Zealand, you just hear the most beautiful welcome and acknowledgement of country sung by Maori people, which is just literally, you just never want it to end. It's so incredible and beautiful and kind of moving. So Australia, as you may or may not know, has the longest living First Nations civilization in the world. So it goes back over 60,000 years. It's been traced back, plus more. We're still discovering things all the time. And that group, by the way, came down through Indonesia into Australia. So if any of you have read the fantastic book Sapiens, you will read the really incredible history of how this came to be, that we have these First Nations. And so I think there's about maybe 600,000 or 700,000 First Nations people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia now.
Just quickly, Jen. So First Nation in our context, for everyone's benefit, is our Orang Asli and Orang Asal. So all our Dayaks, brothers and sisters, Orang Asli in Semenanjung and Orang Asal in Sabah. So in Australia, we collectively call them First Nation.
Thank you. And even that's new, Eon. So we've just like collectively around the world, First Nations have come together as a group and being called First Nations, until only a few years ago we basically said Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So the indigenous peoples of our country, which you have as well, as you said. So over time, as many people have got more engaged in learning and knowledge and understanding about our Indigenous peoples, we have then started to acknowledge their existence, and also the fact that actually, to be perfectly frank, we invaded this country that they owned when Captain Cook from the Empire came on his boat and landed and said, "This is our place. You know, we're the only people here. We can't see anybody else," which wasn't true. They could see other people. And so the Aboriginal people in this country have never actually handed over their sovereignty. They've never ceded the land. So we are pretty much on stolen lands here. And so more and more Australians now know a lot more about this. And so one of the things that we've started over the last 10 or 20 years is a kind of a process of reconciliation. It's not a very good process of reconciliation, but it is an attempt to start to reconcile. And some Aboriginal people will say, well, you can't reconcile because you've never asked for forgiveness. We're not friends that broke up. You know, we're not in a relationship and we broke up and like, oh, well, let's, we were friends and let's make up. That's not what happened. We were never friends because you came and stole our country. So even reconciliation in that term is very difficult. So there's a lot of work to do in Australia, but there's an incredible generation of young people your age, young Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, Indigenous young people who are phenomenal leaders and activists and innovators, and they're coming through and they're really pushing for things like a treaty. They're really pushing for things like land ownership and proper sovereignty. There's a lot of work going on, and I expect in the next 10 years that generation of young people will take Australia forward even further. So that's the background. But the very least and the smallest thing that we can do is at least acknowledge when we begin a meeting or a conference or a summit that we're on Aboriginal land.
Thank you, Jen. I think that's a good way to kick us off as well. I think for all of us Malaysians, it is a reminder that, as a multicultural country, a country that celebrates every major culture that we have in this country, this is a very precious thing that doesn't happen, in everywhere in the world, right? To have such a peaceful and multicultural country where we acknowledge every major cultures here in Malaysia. And also a reminder that in our work in social innovation, social entrepreneurship, and even entrepreneurship itself, we have to also be conscious of the gap that our Indigenous brothers and sisters still continue to face, the lack of job opportunities for them, the kind of lack of opportunities for a lot of them who still live in rural and regional areas as well. So it's a reminder for us as well that, our Indigenous brothers and sisters here in Sarawak itself don't enjoy the equal access that most of us do have access to. So that was a good introduction, Jen, and thank you very much. Benny, do you maybe want to share with us a little bit about your how did, in the beginning stage of Australia's journey in building the social entrepreneurship ecosystem, or in general, how did how was social entrepreneurship seen like in the beginning when you first started?
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you, Eon. And apologies if my internet's unstable. I'm not sure if that's happening at my end, but just to acknowledge too that social entrepreneurship and social innovation was around a long time before the School for Social Entrepreneurs and other organizations were founded around 2009. That was like just a coalescing point of a group of people and organizations coming together to say very consciously, we need to build or nurture the ecosystem. But social entrepreneurs have been, operating in this country for decades, doing various things in a whole range of different areas, from farming to employment, education, you name it. And in fact, Jan was one of those people. Even before that point, Jan had founded several organizations. And so at that point, basically, there was a recognition that we needed to consciously build the movement
Benny's connection is dropping off.
If Benny turns off his camera, which is a bit sad, but it might be a bit better.
Yeah.
Okay, let's try that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I hope my picture is decent. So, there was a very conscious recognition that social entrepreneurs can't go it alone, basically. Social entrepreneurs need community, they need access to support, which can include educational type supports, business planning type supports. It can also be access to markets like funding opportunities, the ability to sell products or sell services. There's a whole complex range of different facets that make up an entrepreneurship or innovation ecosystem, and that's kind of what was happening at that time. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And I guess over to Jen is, Jen being one of the pioneers, one of the early ones. You went from someone who was a social entrepreneur to them being part of the ecosystem that incubated so many social entrepreneurs and now supporting the larger ecosystem. How did you see that change and the shift, or how and what does the scene look like now?
Yeah, so I was a crazy entrepreneurial kid as well. So I was that kid who had a lemonade stand, that classic American kind of entrepreneur school thing. I had a lemonade stand at the end of the driveway near my house, right? Which was great. That was pretty cool, 8 years of age. The only problem was that my house was in quite a kind of a not a city area. And so only 2 cars went past my house every day. And one of them was my dad coming home from work. So I sold exactly 1 lemonade every day to my dad. So I learned a lot. So I always feel like I kind of, I had this sort of entrepreneurial kind of mindset and spirit. And my parents were very much people who helped in communities. So I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Lifeline. It's a global, the helplines that you ring up in a crisis. Do you have those in Malaysia?
We have what they call befrienders. It's similar.
Yeah, similar. Yeah. So my parents helped set that up in Australia. And in those days when it was set up, you used to take the phone call in a crisis, put the phone down, go and get in your car and drive to where there was a problem. And you would physically, you weren't just like on the end of a phone as like a bot. You actually went and did the intervention. And so my parents would come home with all these children and families, or women escaping domestic violence, or people that were going through really terrible times, and they would stay with us until they got back on their feet. And I always thought that was incredibly powerful, that actually the community got around a person and enabled them to hit the reset button and restart. And that to me is like the core of what is really, really good social innovation, is can you help people in whatever situation they're in kind of hit restart, reset, And those organisations, which were never called social entrepreneurial organisations, were actually the biggest and first social innovations probably in Australia many, many, many decades ago when I was a little kid. So I always had this kind of idea that I wanted to do things differently. And at school, I didn't do any school work. I entertained myself at school by coming up with projects and entrepreneurial projects just so that I could have something to do when I went to school. Otherwise, I was going to get kicked out. And so I did things like set up motor mechanics courses for girls in, schools that had never been done before. And that I was always interested in kind of what was going on in the world and social justice, and whether people were fair and things were fair for everybody, that everybody got the same opportunities, which I think really came from my parents. And so melding those two was really the kind of center of my life journey, bringing that kind of entrepreneurial mindset to some of these really kind of complex issues that were happening for people just in everyday life, and through no sort of fault of their own. So I feel like at one point in time, I was so off the mark to my friends. Like, none of my friends and none of my family ever understood what I was doing or why. They basically thought I was everything from like a high school dropout through to some kind of crazy person. Everybody else I knew was at university doing a serious degree or two. My parents were academics. Everybody else that I knew, anybody else I knew was probably in business. And then over about a 15, 20-year period, everything changed. The whole world changed. And this idea of actually you could do good and do well came together. So you didn't have to do good things on your weekend or after hours and then just go and be a normal, person kind of doing deals in your day job. You could actually blend them. And I met this incredible woman called Anita Roddick, who set up the Body Shop, which was, again, one of the first global social enterprises. And I met her when I was like 22 or 23. And she was in Brisbane, Benny and Eon, and I went up to her and I spoke to her, and she gave me a lot of time, and she transformed my view, because she said, actually, you can do business and social change together at the same time. You don't need to do them separately. And that was really then the rest of my life was mapped out because of Anita Roddick and what she did with the Body Shop, how she brought Indigenous people as well, particularly in with their products and their skills to her product, which was cosmetics, and then she sold it globally, but she was always very clear about the supply chain. So where was the product coming from, its purity to source, her acknowledgement of ancient knowledge systems of traditional owners. And yes, after she died, and she died early and young, which was very sad, her family kind of sold the business off to L'Oreal, which was kind of very distressing. But the fact was that she had for 25 years done something that nobody had done. And lots of us out of the UK and all around the world watched that, saw that and said, wow, business, commerce and purpose can come together in a powerful way and change people's lives. And so I'm indebted to that meeting and that opportunity to be with Anita Roddick.
And what's the scene?
I don't know if I answered your question, by the way.
No, you did, but I think you also left a lot of incredible stuff that you've done, especially during with Create Foundation, SVA, and later on when when you're running FYA, where you incubated so many successful social entrepreneurs and policymakers. I must say, some of them has gone on to be policymakers and doing incredible stuff all around the world, not just in Australia. But what is the scene like now, Jen? What is the social entrepreneurship scene like in Australia now?
Well, I think the ecosystem is quite developed. A few years ago when Benny and I were doing work together with the School for Social Entrepreneurs, which we brought out from the UK, and that School for Social Entrepreneurs in a bit was what I then replicated at Foundation for Young Australians, supporting 500 young entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs and innovators. I think that's seen back then, you know, we were only at the beginning of talking about things like impact investment. So new forms of bringing money to this area. We were only just talking about kind of building out the you know, School for Social Entrepreneurs and Social Ventures Australia were fairly unique in that they're sort of building capability and support. So, you know, the ecosystem is much deeper now. It's actually, you know, an ecosystem's growing when it differentiates. So, for instance, now we have a bunch of different kinds of investment for different things. We now have procurement as one of the major streams of entrepreneurship. The thing that I think is missing, which is really sad, is still government. Government are still, the bonds that government are prepared to do are mostly around bricks and mortar. So they'll do maybe social housing is what they'll put an impact bond to, but pretty much nothing else. And then also I actually think SSE, where Benny was the CEO and built that out for us, that is really missing. So that local, because what SSE did, which was different to Foundations for Young Australians, because the Foundation for Young Australians said, we started off with 10 a year and ended up with 50 a year, 50 young 16 to 28-year-old young entrepreneurs with ideas for social change, and let's back the hell out of them and bring everything to them in terms of support, build a cohort, make sure you've got your kind of tribe for life, which all of that has happened, as Eon has said. They are now literally the people that are going to be running Australia in 5 minutes, but they're also globally recognised change makers, social entrepreneurs, innovators, all the things, which is amazing and awesome. And it's just the beginning. But what SSE did was SSE went into local communities and said, if you have an idea for change in your community, in your street, in your neighborhood, we want to know about it and we want to back that. And that is missing in Australia as a part of the ecosystem. And I think it's incredibly sad because there are lots of accelerators now. Universities have probably got the biggest number of accelerators than anyone in the country and throwing millions at them. But I think that that piece that Benny did and the SSE represented, it's a huge gap. And I'm really sad about it. And I would like to get it up again, Benny. So now you're back in Australia. Let's have another go. When Benny left, it all went to hell, basically.
Yeah, I was there when it all got started and halfway through. And so Benny, now it's over to you. Maybe, let's deep dive a little bit more into SSE, the model of SSE. You know, how did you go on to design the intended outcome of SSE as well, given that a lot of most of the people in this room here are going to be designing and running programs for social entrepreneurs and social innovators. What were the things that worked? What are the things that did work as well? There's a lot of questions there, Benny.
Wow, that's and excuse the lack of video, but I'll just keep it off for ease of connection. But that's a lot of questions there, Eon. And just to pick up on what Jan said, I think Jan is really right from my observation as well. That's one of the things that's sadly missing is how do we get access to people who would not ordinarily get access to this kind of support and be able to create change in their local communities. So just to put some qualifiers around what we mean when we talk about social entrepreneurship and reaching out to people who might have creative ideas, that group of people can be incredibly diverse. And Jan is like one of the quintessential examples of the classic social entrepreneur who goes out there and sets up organizations, sets up businesses and has that kind of drive. But innovators and entrepreneurs can also exist within existing organizations. They're called more intrapreneurs, perhaps. That includes non-profit organizations, local governments, state governments, departments, service industries. And we had people come through our programs that may not have successfully set up their business in the long run, but went on to do amazing things through existing organizations or in the change space. So that's important to recognize as well, I think. I feel like we were reaching an incredibly diverse group of people of different ages, backgrounds, ethnicities, languages, classes. And it was fascinating to see, who had succeeded in the long run too. And when I I want to just talk about success and failure because this is really important. Firstly, entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship is no different to classic commercial entrepreneurship in the sense that within 3 years, 75 to 90% will fail or will experience some kind of failure. That happens across a lot of different industries, and the level of failure will vary depending on how volatile that industry might be. For example, food services industries can be much more tricky. Businesses that can kind of struggle to get cash flow, that kind of thing. So one of the things that we were doing was helping fast track failure as much as fast track success, and helping people come into experiences where they can network with each other and learn from what what other people have done in the past, like bringing successful entrepreneurs into the room where they can share their story, warts and all. This is what worked, this is what didn't work, and so that they can really learn from the experience of others, their peers who are setting things at the same time, or people who've set things up before. So
Benny,
I know I'm jumping around a little bit here. I want to come, yep.
I was going to say, for context, do you want to describe what is the program like? Like, what's the model of the program?
Yeah, great. I was just about to do that. Yeah, great. So what we did basically in that particular program, people came in with an already established change idea, that were at various stages of development. So some people were truly at the beginning, conceptual ideation stage. Other people had already piloted a service or prototyped a product. Other people had formulated their business plan or established a legal structure. So we had people at various stages of the journey. Through the 9-month incubation process, we gave them a bunch of different experiences. There was certainly an element of networking where they could be with each other and have some kind of community support. That was very highly valued. People loved more than anything else to know that they weren't alone, because the entrepreneurial journey in any context is an incredibly lonely journey. You're out there, like Jan had described her own personal experiences. You're out putting yourself out there at tremendous risk, personal risk financially, risk with your families, your identity. There's a whole lot of things that you put on the line. So there was this community aspect. Each entrepreneur had a personal coach, so that they received every 4 to 6 weeks, they had a one-to-one coaching session with a professional coach. And the coach would focus on 2 aspects. There was the business aspect of what are the steps that I need to take in order to take my idea, my service, my product, my business to another level. And then there was also the personal element, like what are the struggles that I'm experiencing personally within myself. And Jan will speak more eloquently to this, but this is what we found, that entrepreneurs, it's easy to learn the head stuff in a way, to go out and find the resources, the support to develop a business plan, to pull together a budget in a spreadsheet. But the intangible stuff of your self-beliefs, the self-doubt, all of the kind of those intrapersonal kind of challenges is where people most struggled, and that's often where they would come undone. So getting that one-to-one support was very important. We set them up with mentors. There was small group work where they got to really drill into the ideas that they were running in their business. They were called action learning sets. It was a questioning approach. And then the other key was we had expert witness sessions, where an example could be someone like Jan. We would bring them into the room. Jan was asked to tell her story, warts and all, everything that she had gone through to set up a particular business, not just on the tactical side, but also how it felt, what were the biggest failures, how they struggled. And those experiences were incredibly empowering and valid, because the entrepreneur, the nascent entrepreneur could see in the expert witness themselves and say, if they can do it, I can do it too. And those sessions were some of the most empowering and impactful of all of the things that we did. So I think that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think you touch on a few interesting and important point as well. One is that there's a lot more focus on the individual's development rather than really on the hard skills of how to do business modeling, how to plan your financials and things like that. And that's something that Jen brought up as well on you know, our the most important thing for us as enablers is to help people hit that reset, right? To surround them with the right people so that they don't feel alone, so that they feel empowered, so that they have that cohort as well to feel that sense of belonging and sense of support as well. So Jen, maybe you can expand further why you think that network is more important actually than the skills that they can learn, you know, themselves, or you know, the more hard skills of business modeling and financial management and things like that.
I don't know that the network is more important. I mean, I know that certainly for SSE, the network's very important when you're kind of in a local community, and also to get that sort of emotional support. But I think the network also allows the learning, but I would never say that you don't need some kind of core technical skills. Like, I think there are core technical. I really wished, you know, that I'd got some skills much earlier than I did. I wouldn't have had so much failure, right? Or not so much failure, but I often thought things that took me like 6 or 7 years to do, if I'd had more technical skills, I would have done them in 2 or 3 years. So that's the difference. The difference is how quickly you can get to where you want to get to based on the set of skills that you've got. The other thing is that I often didn't have the skills myself, and I didn't even go and learn them. I always built teams. So I'm very much, I am the antithesis, and I'm also kind of very vocally against the kind of single entrepreneur model. I've never built anything ever, not ever, including when I was 16 or 15, without a team. You know, I always had a team of people around me. I always knew what I was good at, and I always knew what I wasn't good at and was never going to be good at. I could learn about it, but that doesn't mean I'm going to be great at it. So in everything I've ever done, I've always hired and kind of an operational person. I'm big picture, I'm visionary, and I need somebody to put boots on the ground, and that's an operational person. So I've always hired that early. I've always hired, you know, no matter what I was doing, kind of that person who can do the you know, impact work. And I can do that work again, but if I can find somebody who can get the model right for impact, the business model, you know, you need other people who can really thrash that out in a kind of a almost arm's length way, because you're very invested in your own idea and its success. And so you'll do anything. You'll sell your grandmother if you have to make it work, which is not a cool outcome for a social enterprise. So somebody else who can be arm's length on the business model is often really, really important. So I've only ever worked with teams of people ever. I've never, you know, I consider myself a work in progress entrepreneur. I'm not done. I will never be done. I will never know everything. I will never have learned everything. I'm a work in progress. I'm a work in progress as a human. So therefore I'm a work in progress as an innovator, as an entrepreneur, as a mother, as a friend. You know, I'm a work in progress. I'm not perfect. I'm never going to be. So I think giving yourself permission to be work in progress. I think I've even started putting it, I've got it on my LinkedIn that I'm work in progress. Giving yourself permission to be work in progress says, I can be in the learner lane. I can have a beginner's mindset as often as I like and as often as I need to. And you need a beginner's mindset. You really do. You need to be able to start again and again and again, or learn a new thing and have a beginner's mindset around that. So that beginner's mindset, you can have a beginner's mindset at 4 or at 84. And in fact, I love 84-year-olds with beginner's mindset. So if any of you have got grandparents or great-grandparents who are really like cool, like keep doing new things, they have a beginner's mindset. They're curious, which is incredible and wonderful. So I think there's a lot of things that you can learn, and there's a lot of things that you learn by bringing other people together around you and building a team really fast. And then there's some things that you can learn more traditionally. So it's just working out what you need, and every project's different. I've never done a project, and I've done dozens now, where it's been the same, probably except that building a team bit.
So
actually.
a lot of these guys are going to design, you know, accelerators or programs, incubation programs for social entrepreneurs. I guess from Benny and Jen, what were the things that worked and what were the things that didn't work that you would advise them before they go on to design their respective programs?
Oh gosh.
I guess first of all, lone entrepreneur. Should we accept social entrepreneur who comes in with one idea and themselves, that they don't have a team, they don't have a co-founder?
Oh, I think all models can exist for sure. Yeah, the sole entrepreneur, the team-based, the co-entrepreneur. I'm glad Jan really mentioned that, because we haven't done any kind of categorical study on like who made it in the end of the initiatives that we were supporting at the end, and certainly for the Schools for Social Entrepreneurs, but just from observation and the people I've kept in, the people that did were either people who co-founded with other people or had established teams. It is much harder to do it on your own, but I don't think that precludes somebody who does come in on their own from doing something too, because that's the kind of thing you're building the plane as it's taking off, basically. So it's an inherently messy process, and people, if you have the kind of supports that can help identify what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, you can kind of fill in the gaps, and so people can kind of get that kind of support. I'm really glad Jan highlighted that. That was very important. Yeah. And I think it actually is, because we were working with people who came from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and didn't have.
I think he's going to say didn't have
support your ability to go and say that again.
I was just seeing if I could test the idea of finishing your sentence when you
right.
So yeah, did you say didn't have strong networks, or did you say didn't have a lot of resources?
Well, it was actually a combination of both, because it's not actually necessarily not having a strong network, but it's the ability to be able to go out and create the network. And if you grow up if you come from a lower socioeconomic background where you don't have access to certain types of people or the confidence to be able to go and pitch your idea to certain types of people, that's something that could hold you back. And so that's where, the support comes in, I feel. Like if you're wanting to work truly with marginalized people, sadly, I think, or not sadly, I mean, great for all of the entrepreneurs out there who went and were able to be very successful in Australia. I think some people through privilege of race, of class, had a head start in a way. And that is important to talk about, I feel, because not everybody is starting at the same place.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Benny. And I think that the other thing is the people I loved at FYA were the one, because we brought people in cohorts, so people would come with a bunch of education ideas, right, or environmental ideas, or diversity and inclusion ideas. And you would see often every year, you would see a bunch of them that would just have the humility to say, actually, you're doing what I want to do, except better. And so why don't we join forces? And I celebrated that more than I celebrated any individual success, how people could actually get out of their own way and have the humility to say, actually, we will be better together. And that saved a lot of time, resources, duplication of effort. And so you got your team, like right there, you got your co-founder, just you found them in this group of people. So I would always go looking for, and particularly for people who don't have networks, and there is an inequity in that, I think, around networks as well, that you just don't get access to the things that people with more resources and more education do, or more access to people. Join forces is a really powerful. So never be so proud or so attached to your own idea that you can't join with someone else and say we're better together.
Right. Yeah.
And I think Benny, go.
I just want to say I loved what Jan was talking about before too. I wouldn't underestimate the power of actually learning skills like business models and having the kind of technical support that's very powerful around fast tracking ideas, especially when you're kind of growing. But there's also a whole process around the ideation stage that's really important too, because people will come in with an idea and think, oh, this is the greatest thing, this is what I need to do, but they really haven't thought through or mapped out the problem and truly understood the problem. And so what you find if you do that well is what Jan just referred to, where there are other people already solving that problem and there might be a different kind of gap, or sometimes the problem that you first perceive is not the problem at all. You've got to go further upstream to find what the cause was. And I think that, not just looking at, well, what's the gap in the problem solution marketplace here, but it's like, what's causing the gap in the first place? And so I think that's really important work to do.
That's really good, Benny, because one of the things that I didn't mention, Eon, so lots of what's brilliant about what's happened in social enterprise evolution or social innovation evolution in Australia over the last 10 years is seeing the blending of other disciplines. So for instance, design thinking has come absolutely into social enterprise, which is what Benny's talking about. Like you have to, as if you had a customer, you have to go and test and talk to the people with the lived experience. You've got to know what your customer wants, and you better know that what you're offering is what they want. So, that blending of customer kind of market research with human-centered design thinking, all of that has come in, which is why I think social innovation is kind of the overarching kind of piece now, of which all these things are nested as part of a really interesting ecosystem. They may not be as joined up now as they could be yet. It might still be a bit early, but that was one of the features of the School for Social Entrepreneurs, was that design thinking piece, which I thought was always very powerful. And that's spread everywhere now in social innovation and social entrepreneurship.
One thing I wanted to add actually is beyond just that intra network or having that cohort of people with ideas or social entrepreneurs where they're able to support each other. One advice that I remember Jan gave me, quite a long time ago, is that every now and then for people like us, we need a privilege check. People like us who have influence over certain key influencer, people like us who have access to resources or certain people of power. We have the responsibility as well to connect some of these change makers or social entrepreneurs, innovators who are in the communities, and they don't have the access to these resources, to these networks, to these people of power and influence. And a lot of the work that I did in Australia is thanks to Jen, connecting me to people who I need to be connected to in order to get things going. Speaking of that, Jen, do you want to maybe talk a little bit about YSP? Because I think that's a very important and a very, very, very interesting piece of work that you guys did at FYA as well.
Yeah, so the Young Social Pioneers is that program that I talked about where we had 500 young entrepreneurs over about a 9-year period. And Benny and Eon, we got very serious a couple of years in about that diversity. Like we actually went looking, we kind of went off mainstream kind of media channels where we would go looking for people to join Young Social Pioneers, which is a 1-year program of intensive support to bring your idea to life, basically. So often at that idea stage, sometimes a bit further along, but often at the initial idea stage, or maybe, definitely less than 3 years. So I don't think anyone came into Young Social Pioneers with something that was over 3 years old, basically. And we basically shut down all the traditional social media channels, and we basically used people that were in those local communities that we wanted to go to. So in Australia, there are kind of gatherings of different multicultural groups. So for instance, there's been a massive influx of African young people and families over the last 10 years into Australia, particularly into Melbourne and a bit in Sydney and Brisbane. And so we would go and work with those community leaders and say, we really, really, really want to make this offering to those young people. And so how might we work on that together? And the same with young people who might be recent refugees from other places, or just in our very multicultural areas that may be lower socioeconomic, we would go and work. Same with, we had a really strong First Nations team of entrepreneurs every year for about 5 or 6 years. And again, we got the first group, then they went and got the next group. So that kind of pay it forward is a really good way to reach out as well. So we did many different things. And as I said, only a small amount was stuff that you would see in traditional social media platforms, for instance, but a lot of work behind the scenes. I was so, super happy to see where those young people have gone and how they've become leaders in their communities and leaders in other parts of Australia.
Maybe you can give us a few examples of some of this at YSP alumni.
Yeah. Gosh.
Where do we start, right?
I mean, some of them are now serial entrepreneurs, right? So a young woman called Lucinda Hartley who came in, who sort of was a landscape kind of person who got very, very interested in how we design spaces to live in the 21st century. And she ended up actually setting up that group called Co-Design Studio, which I think was based out of the Hub for a while, Eon.
Yeah.
Where they would go and work with people in communities to design literally their streets and suburbs from the ground up. But then she got really clever about 2 or 3 years ago and started something called Neighbourlytics, where they started using and building new technology to actually track people's movements in suburbs so that you could really find out how people use the space and place that they're working in, where living and working. Where do they mostly go? Where do they mostly congregate? And that was often data that she's now discovered that was very different to the things that government use as planning tools. So she's giving real life, real time data about what goes on in our neighbourhoods and how people use them, so that planners and designers and architects do things that are much more closely connected to how people are living. So she's amazing. So she's now a serial entrepreneur. She was in one of our first groups as well. People like Hayley Maguire, who's a young First Nations, one of our First Nations leaders, who set up, was very, very interested in education, but First Nations education, not Western education specifically. And she's now built a whole group of young people. She went around the whole of Australia talking to young Aboriginal people about First Nations learning and how could we put into our schools in Australia knowledge and information about how First Nations people live and work and operate and do culture and relate in their families, but also how could self-determination, how could we ensure that First Nations young people are learning about First Nations practices, ways of doing, ways of being, even in the existing school system. So a kind of a two-way process. And now, and this is like the next wave of entrepreneurship in my view, now I'm working with Hayley on a really big project to change the education system in Australia and transform it to be much more suited to the 21st century. So how are we going to live and work and learn and thrive in a very different world with a modern workplace and with an education system that can match that? So we've stepped up from kind of programs and doing things on the ground to real system change projects, very significant system change projects. And that to me is the best social innovation work. Is probably going to happen at a systems level with lots of people working together, entrepreneurs, innovators, designers, all working together, because no one group can actually address these issues that we're dealing with. So we're going to have to band together. So now I've become much more an ecosystem builder and leader than I am an entrepreneur, doing one project.
Before I get to Benny to talk, to share some of the examples of the FYA alumni, Jen, I wanted you to also tell us a little bit about the $20 Boss, because I thought that was a fantastic program as well. And hopefully this inspire the people in the room as well, maybe to start something similar in Malaysia.
Yeah, so $20 Boss was all about saying that we want our children and young people in schools, students, to have a very different skill set. And so what we did was we got this program, we actually borrowed it. Do you know the acronym CASE? This is a very English acronym, but you can use this. CASE means copy and steal everything, CASE. So we found this idea in the UK and we cased it in Australia and called it $20 Boss. And so what happens for a whole term or semester of year 9, so that's like 14, 15-year-olds, 13, 14, 15-year-olds, we gave them in school $20, like a real $20. And with
just quickly, $20 is about 60 ringgit in Malaysia.
Okay, great. A real $20, 60 ringgit.
Yep.
And with that, they had to do 4 things: set up a business for people, planet, purpose, profit. People, planet, purpose, profit. And so, this was part of their schoolwork. So whether they were studying maths or English, different teachers from different disciplines used this program for a whole semester, and the students had to go and do this. And we saw the most amazing things that 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds did, which was mind-blowing by just giving these $20. One of the things that they really did a lot was that they would join forces. So they'd get all their $20 and say, us 3 are going to work together because now we've got $60. And they would form teams of hustlers, hipsters, and hackers. So the hustlers were the marketing people, the hipsters were the kind of the kind of people who came up with all the cool ideas, and the hackers were the tech people. And in every team there was a hustler, a hipster, and a hustler, hipster, a hacker. And so they would join forces and come up with these projects. And the projects were things that they could see in their community. So a lot of the projects were about, for instance, upcycling and recycling. They would see that there was waste all around their suburb, and they would literally collect stuff and repurpose it, upcycle it, recycle it. Some of them would do a whole heap of really interesting projects that were around tech, like building tech platforms for mental health so that they could support each other. There were just incredible stories in low socioeconomic, so in the poorer areas, they would keep their $20 to the last minute and only spend it when they had their product to go to the local market and sell. And then they would spend their $20 to buy the table to put their product on, whereas others would band together. We trained 60,000 young Australians across a 5-year period to be young entrepreneurs. It was the biggest program that's ever happened in Australia. And I'm always saying to business leaders in Australia, you better watch out, because we trained 13-year-olds about business. And the idea was that they would do it every year across all of high school, a different project every year. And then we had awards, and then we had schools. So, one school had 25 different enterprise projects going. Now, across Australia, there are lots and lots of these programs now, all people casing $20 Boss, all people copying and stealing $20 Boss, calling it other things, calling it other names, which is brilliant. And so we've seen a lot more young people now being trained in entrepreneurship. But if there's one way to train people in entrepreneurship, which is what we're all talking about here, is to actually go and do it and try it. And if you do it at 12 and 13, you're allowed to fail as many times as you like. By the way, the statistics were 98% of the young people, I forgot to tell you this bit, you have to pay the $20 back at the end of the program with the dollar interest, so that we can then use it for the next group of students. It's an evergreen bank. So we never had to raise money, because from when we had the first amount of money, then we just had to keep recycling the money. We were upcycling the $20. So you had to pay it back. 98% of students paid that money back, the $20 with the dollar interest. Most of them made much more money than that, and they would put the money back into their business, into their school, or into their community. All of those things were okay. We didn't mind.
Hopefully, yeah, hopefully we're going to see someone in this room case that idea and implement it in Sarawak. We can call it the 50 ringgit boss, just to make it
Please
sound a
do
bit
that.
better.
All the materials are available. You can copy and steal all of them. Somebody in Ghana, so Ghana set up 50 Cent Boss as a result of FYA. And also somebody else in South Africa set up 20 Rand Boss or something. Yeah, there's been a lot. It should be a global movement.
Yeah, and I think that it's something that, you know, we can easily get going here in Sarawak, especially if we partner with one of the banks, because they're always looking for young people to open bank accounts. So, you know, that's something that the banks can get behind as well with their CSR as well. Benny, do you want to share some of the success stories or the alumni from SSE? And
Yeah, very happy to. And I'll give you a range of different types of businesses from large to small. And I'm not giving this in a particular order to say the first one is the most, you know, successful or most popular. But I'll give you an example of a large commercial idea. And it was a business called Who Gives a Crap, which was basically the idea was to create the purpose was to fund sanitation and toilet projects in developing nations, where it was a recognition of so many 100 million people don't have access to a toilet. So they created basically a toilet paper made of sustainable product. It's a sustainable product where the 50% of the profits would go into funding these toilet projects. And I share this example not only because it was successful, but actually it's a classic case of, so the guy Simon Griffiths, he founded it with two other guys. So it's a classic team entrepreneurship approach. He came up with the idea 12 years ago, 2009, and had success in slowly building this business. But interestingly, it was COVID that skyrocketed it, because it's kind of interesting that it just can sometimes take time to build these things. And I remember back when he first came up with the idea, people were saying, you know, you're never going to compete basically with the big box toilet papers, you know, people who go to the supermarket and buy the toilet paper. But of course, when COVID hit and people were stockpiling their toilet paper and all they had was to be able to order online, his whole business went through the roof. And so it's a classic example of a visionary person who can see something that the market can't yet see, and has then been able to invest, you know, millions of dollars into toilet sanitation projects around the world. I want to give an example, a couple of really kind of much more small examples, if you like. One was, this is an employment-based project where a girl, her name was Hannah, was wanting to provide opportunities for people who are often excluded from the employment market to get skills in restaurants, to be able to then go and get work in that field. She recognized early on, and this is the power of the ideation process, that she was not going to be able to raise the capital to start a restaurant. And she was very passionate about not just starting a local street business or a cafe, a sandwich cafe, that kind of thing. She wanted to give the young people an opportunity to get experience in a fine dining context. And she was never going to be able to raise the capital in order to start a fine dining restaurant. But what she recognized, and this is about doing your SWOT, your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats, she recognized that a lot of restaurants in Melbourne, where she founded it, were closed on Monday nights. So she went to a restaurant and said, hey, can I borrow your restaurant for a Monday night and trial this thing? She grabbed a group of young people. The head chef of the restaurant said, yeah, I'll give my time. And they started this pop-up restaurant one night a week for 6 weeks. And then they would do this periodically, and it kind of grew from there. So she kept it overhead low, where the restaurant was willing to donate the space, donate the kitchen, donate leftover produce. The chefs were inspired by being involved in something that was giving back, so they gave their time. And then they had all of their money basically to focus in on the training and employment development opportunities for young people who were often from migrant or refugee backgrounds. So that was like, I love that one because it is so creative and it's looking at the opportunities that already exist that you wouldn't ordinarily think of. There was a guy, Michael Combs, who set up a business called a nonprofit called Career Trackers, been highly successful. He recognized, interesting story actually, he came from the US and he got a job in a company in Sydney, and he walked into the boardroom on the first day and he said, "Where's all the Aboriginal people?" And they laughed at him. And they said, "Well, you know, Aboriginal people, the First Nations people don't work in corporate Australia." And he just said, "Well, that's not good enough. We need to do something about that." And he went about creating a program whereby he placed young First Nations people who were coming through university degrees into big corporates. And so he'd bring on the companies to provide an internship opportunity and then a pathway to full-time employment after they graduated. And there was a big gap. And because oftentimes the young First Nations people were the first people in their family or in their community to go to university, and then the first people to try and get access into a mainstream work environment like that. So that's been highly successful. There was a guy, Ian Jones, who set up an organization in Cambodia. So we had people working in different countries as well. And he was actually almost setting himself up as partly an intermediary, supporting local micro business development in Cambodia for people who would not ordinarily be able to access the business support. And so it was very much about helping support local people to set up for-profit businesses. And he would help then provide both the education and training and support, and then the marketplace through which they could sell their products in Cambodia itself, and then to export it back to Australia where they could sell their scarves, sell their handmade products, that kind of thing. And so that's one of the challenges in a country like Cambodia is getting access to markets. And so I really like that one. And maybe one final one, there was a lady, Alicia Martin in Sydney. So Alicia had an experience of a very challenged background and lived in a community where there were high cases of unemployment, where women were often single mums and had experienced a whole range of different problems from domestic violence, did not work. And she recognized that they needed to provide, she wanted to help provide them a way to get access into community, to get them support and to help them find employment. And it was so micro that, I mean, her process was basically knocking on their door and saying, "You're coming with me," and providing them with a cup of tea and a plate of biscuits and chatting with them about what they were experiencing and brainstorming, how can I support you? How can we support each other? And it was a business called Food Connect, and they ended up creating a kind of a food network where they could provide meals to people in their local community who were not able to access, healthy food options. And I really love that because it was a classic example of somebody who didn't have access previously to networks or even this, I guess, the confidence always to go and ask for like funding or support, that kind of thing. And the School for Social Entrepreneurs program really helped her catalyze this innovation idea that she had and provide her the support. And there's real power in, this is going back to what Jan mentioned early on, this kind of gap where some entrepreneurial ideas can be as local as the people living in your own street. How do I support them? How do I help them change their lives? So anyway, there's kind of a smattering of different ideas.
I find it funny, as we're talking about some of these examples, because these are all my friends before I left Australia almost 7-8 years ago now. Definitely makes me feel like I'm getting old. We have a question from Shamil, Jen or Benny actually. Good question actually. So you mentioned, Benny, that sometimes the problem that they're trying to solve is not really the root cause of the problem, right? So how do we differentiate between the root cause of a social problem versus a symptom of the social problem itself? Either Jen or Benny, either one of you want to take it?
Well, just in terms of process, I think when Jan was talking about human-centered design thinking, that's an established process that can be used to help think through problems. It really is like a basic early mapping process of mapping all of the components of a system or a problem, or who's experiencing it, how do these things connect. That will help kind of expand the understanding of what's going on. I like the analogy of upstream thinking. So, a classic kind of metaphor of, there's somebody's floating down the river. A woman jumps into the river, pulls them out, gives them mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, saves them from drowning. 3 minutes later, somebody else floats down the river, go into the river, pull them out, give them mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and they survive. The same thing keeps on going, and we kind of keep fixing this problem of people who are drowning in the river until the point where we say enough's enough. I'm going to walk upstream and see who's throwing them in the river in the first place, or why are they jumping in the river, or maybe there's something along the way, like a set of rapids that's kind of making the canoe kind of fall apart. And so just going much earlier upstream in terms of how a problem comes to be. And part of that also is recognizing that for every solution you create to the problem is going to create new problems. And so that's a very important process to recognize too. And I'll give you just one simple example of that. Just in the context of social entrepreneurship, it's great to go out there and provide support for social entrepreneurs and encourage them and say, hey, you can do it. You can kind of make this thing happen. But of course, there's a whole lot of personal risk that people take on. And we found as we went on through our support and our program that we had to increase the level of support around how do they think through their own lives financially, and how do they support themselves in the process while they are building the idea and building the business. Because that was a gap we were kind of blind to initially. We kind of assumed that they would have that sorted, but it was a recognition that actually there are some basic building blocks that people need to find support with. And you can find that basically in any idea. It will create new problems as you go. And you kind of always need to be attending to what are we learning every day. Yeah.
And another question from Rushdie, actually. And Rushdie is an interesting one because Rushdie is from a private independent hub. So they took over an abandoned house, or a house that has been not utilized. And they actually, from grassroots effort, gathered communities and slowly renovated the abandoned house into a beautiful hub that it is today for the creative industry. So maybe if Jen or Benny can give some examples of some of the creative industry, social entrepreneurs, or even some of the programs for the arts and creative industries side of things, they will be amazing. But his question is, are there any cases of an ecosystem or I guess a ecosystem shift that changed the system, or it was so powerful, the ecosystem was so powerful that it affects authority or government policy?
Can I also link that to the second question after that, which is about blockchain, because I think that's a good example, actually. Whoever asked that. So I'm going to kind of join two questions. Malcolm asked that. So Malcolm and Syed, I think blockchain's sort of super interesting in this, right? So there's a heap of work going on in the European Union. There's a heap of work going on in the US. We all went to like 100 seminars and webinars on blockchain about 5 years ago. We all got super excited. And then people just had to go and do the work. They had to stop talking about it and go and do it. And I've now noticed a lot of work cropping up. And I think it's interesting in the places. So for instance, if Anita Roddick and Body Shop were going today, they would absolutely be using blockchain. So that transparency all the way through from supplier, all the way through to customer, the transparency of that, and also the ability for blockchain to take out all those middle pieces along the line who all click the ticket, which is actually what those old supply chains do. Everyone gets a cut along the way. And so you just, the money, the income gets dispersed is just one thing that blockchain actually removes. But everything from the coffee beans from South America through to, there's a lot of justice projects, and that's why I would say that the ability to disrupt things that are beyond what governments can control you around, justice would have to be one of them. And so there's big supply chain work going on in the EU. There's big blockchain work going on in the EU about justice projects and transparency, and also distribution of information, data, documents. So that's very, very, very important. Just think about Afghanistan right now and why blockchain would be so important for many people there, journalists, interpreters, translators, all the people that are suffering and going to suffer there. So there, and now after that, universities got involved and said, we've got a blockchain course for you. Have we got the course for you? And there's a million of those. And now, of course, corporates have got involved. So there's big blockchain projects being led by IBM on social good. There's big blockchain projects being led by Cisco on social good. So now everyone's in. We're all at the trough, as I like to say, trying to drink at the same water hose. It's all good, it's fine, but it's very nascent, I think, still. And there's still a lot of skepticism about blockchain, also because, of course, of the link to cryptocurrency, which, of course, a lot of people are still very, very antsy about. Antsy. How do you translate antsy, Eon? Like very unsure about, and you're very unsure about, and very hyper vigilant, and kind of, am I going to lose all my money? Skeptical. Thank you, Malcolm. Skeptical. So I think that there's a lot going on, and so that link has added another dimension, I think, which is we've got to work through. Of course, in the next 10 years, in this decade, particularly for the environment, particularly for justice, geopolitics, and then also the more traditional things like supply chains of products, I'm very, very, very sure blockchain will find its lane, will find its opportunities, will open up, and we will work out the currencies. I'm sure you all agree. Somehow we'll work out crypto in all of that, and it will be joined up. But there's many, many, many good examples that are worth looking at. And if you wanted to, if I wanted support in doing something, I'd be going and tapping one of these big corporates, because they obviously are interested in, innovation and also in transparency. ESGs are, well, apart from diversity, equity, and inclusion, the ESGs are their number one priority over the next decade. Number one, as corporations, wherever they are, whether they're in Malaysia, Australia, US, Italy, doesn't matter. So I just combined two questions, which is a bit cheeky, but I thought we might get through more questions that way.
Benny, do you want to have anything to add on any cases of ecosystem forcing a change so large it affects authority or government policy?
Yeah, it's not in an authoritarian kind of government, but one I found interesting in Canada, and this wasn't an ecosystem-driven one, but it was a social entrepreneurship-driven one, was around immigration and the private partnerships where families could go, together, come in together and basically fund and support a refugee family coming into the country. And I just love that model. The government of Canada backed it in the end. And often these ideas start very small at a micro level, sometimes by a church even. It's like one family connecting with another family. We're going to do this. We're going to support somebody else. And then it became such a great idea that the government of Canada got behind it. And I'm not quite up to date right now as to how far it expanded, but I think, going to Jan's point about geopolitical instability that's going to come with climate change and a bunch of other things, I think immigration is going to be a bigger problem or issue to tackle. Certainly it's one in Australia that we have not gotten right in our entire history. So I'm kind of curious about that one.
And I might just add quickly as well for Rushdie, just an example as well. When I first started in Magic, taking over the social entrepreneurship department, we've been trying to lobby the government to create a recognition or an accreditation for social enterprise. And at the time, it is in 2015, there was only like 130 social enterprise in Malaysia. I went to Ministry of Finance. They said, no, you should go to, Ministry of International Trade. Then they said you have to go to the Economic Planning Unit and so on and so forth. I was basically being pushed around in all the ministry and no one wanted to take it on. Later, when I was pushing for social procurement, the same thing happened. They say you have to go to JAKIM because everyone who goes through our procurement system must get halal certification, and you must go to this ministry and that ministry. So things were not moving. It wasn't until, KJ came along and said that, you know what, I'm willing to give you a chance. And we managed to broker a deal to have the 18th SEA Games that was in Kuala Lumpur pilot, what social procurement could be like. And through SEA Games, they managed to replace all the light bulbs with energy saving light bulbs. They calculated the carbon emission of the SEA Games, the Southeast Asian Games. They gave gifts to the athletes from our social entrepreneurs. I think there's like 1.5 million ringgit worth of procurement from social enterprises for the Southeast Asian Games itself. And only in 2018, I think it was, British Council did a research, a survey, and found that, between 2015, there was only 130 social enterprise. In 2018, they estimate that there's about 13,000 social enterprise in Malaysia. And only then that when I went to the Ministry of Finance, finally they said, okay, let us, consider piloting this accreditation for social enterprise. Before I then left Magic, and then eventually, we did implement it in the beginning, and later Ministry of Entrepreneurship Development and Cooperatives took it on as a way. Now you have the social enterprise accreditation, which we worked so hard to lobby for 3 years. And it all came down to the numbers. When you only have 130 social enterprise, the government don't care, right? But when you have 13,000, they're like, okay, now you're talking. Let's actually do something about this. So there is, I guess, a process to it as well when we try to push for system change or government to shift. And I think Benny and Jen can agree that government is probably sometimes one of the most frustrating to try to push them to be proactive or push them to actually, react to what's happening in the community.
Yeah, last movers.
Yeah.
The last movers, but the big movers. For me, I wouldn't waste my time in the early stages to even think about it, really trying to persuade government to do something. But it's really when there has to be a lot of momentum and public will to be brought in before a government will kind of get that tipping point where they'll back an idea. So, yeah.
I'll just ask two final questions. And in the last 5 minutes, maybe some of you guys can share with Jen and Benny what you guys do, because I think it'll be interesting to hear from you guys as well. Benny and Jen, first question is, what is the main problem or challenge that the Indigenous people of Australia face from joining corporate world or advancing in the corporate world? And the other question is, what do you do when you feel demotivated, especially in the work that you do?
Gosh, well, the first question I'm almost loath to answer. Who am I to speak for a First Nations person? But I feel, I'll throw this out there. I think we owe it to the world as white people to become more power literate and understand what we bring to situations and our own relationship to power and how we include people and provide access to people. And the question about what was it about being demotivated?
Yeah. What do you do when you feel demotivated?
I rarely feel demotivated. I just, for me, I'm going through a stage right now. I write, for me, writing is a great way to get clarity on my thinking. And I go out and read, I interview people, I talk to people, I find out what they're doing. Yeah, and I go through cycles of that periodically, but yeah, I'm pretty easily motivated. I'm like a natural enthusiast.
Jen?
I'm a bit with Benny about being loath to speak on behalf of anybody at all. I feel like Australia needs to really genuinely rethink our beginnings, and there's a kind of we kind of need a South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission, actually. You know, because first you need the truth, and then after that we can make a plan. But there's a lot of people who, including people at very highest levels of politics, all the way through, who will not accept the truth of Australia's beginnings. And so it's very hard. And we all know that, right? Like, even in our personal lives, if someone won't accept the truth of something that happened, or in our families or in our organizations, it's very, very, very hard to move forward. And I think that Australia will often do amazing things, and we have many brilliant First Nations sports people, and also academics and musicians. And so we love celebrating all of that, but we do that without acknowledging the cost of that to those people in their communities in a country that will not won't even write Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people into our constitution. So we're so far back that we have so far to go. So truth first, truth treaty, and then we can talk about how we move forward. And as I said, there's a lot of incredible people. So it's about allyship. You know, how do you be a brilliant ally to people who are, for whatever reason, in whatever context, actually being discriminated against? And, you know, that's something we all need to think about. And also, that's also something that's not set. You know, we all change. As you all know, social norms are changing massively around the world every day. And I feel like lots of people in my generation are like the people holding everyone back, which is why I spend most of my time with people 30 years and under. Sorry to anybody here who's over 30. But I just really think that there is investment that needs to be made, and intergenerational work that needs to be done, and I'm very, very committed to that. So hence why I spend most of my time with young people, plus they're just more fun. On demotivating, I think that leads to that demotivating question, like who do you spend time with? It's that simple. Who do you spend time with? Because motivation, yes, comes from yourself and your own sense of self, but we all can't all the time feel brilliantly 100% on fire and inspiring and inspired and inspire others and look after people. So, you know, when we used to work with little children, because I used to work with children in foster care, you know, children who've been abused and neglected and taken away from their families. That was one of the first or second or third ventures that I established with some young people in care. And we always used to say to the children, you know, the little children, like, who are the 5 people? And it's so interesting because I've seen people who have 500 friends on Instagram, and you still have to have a conversation with them about who are the 5 people that you would call if you really needed to call someone. And even with 500 friends on Instagram, it's hard for people to work out who I would call. And Eon knows all this work way better than me, because he started and worked so hard on incredible mental health initiatives in Australia. But, you know, who are the 5 people? And so that goes for motivation as well. You know, who you surround yourself with is a huge indication of how far you will go and how successful you will be in life, and particularly in your venture. So, you know, again, we are fed a lot of really terrible stories about you're on your own and you were born into the world on your own and you leave the world on your own, and all, if you follow an American diet of anything, clothes, TV, politics, it's all like I. And we have to go back to this absolute intrinsic belief that our well-being is absolutely connected to everyone else's well-being. The well-being of me is basically only about the well-being of my community. And that's why you'll talk to First Nations young people who may be incredible and doing brilliantly, and they will say, my well-being is connected to my culture and my community. So although I may have succeeded here, unless this piece can be sorted out, then I will not be the whole person and all I could be in the world, and I will not fulfill my potential. So, you know, we are in relation to other all the time. Yes, we have a relationship with ourselves, but we are in relation here on this Zoom. We are in relationship to each other. We just are. Obviously, be way better in the room, and be way better in Borneo, and be way better sitting on the beach. Yes, but we are in relationship to each other here, and that's very powerfully important. So that's what we go to look for. If you're ever feeling, just remember that you are in relation to other at all times, and find that other, find the others. You're not.
And I think that's a really good reminder as well. And I think a couple of reminders that Jen gave us. Number one is we have to acknowledge that even though we have Henry Golding, you know, as a First Nation of Sarawak, you know, we have some Ibans and Dayaks who are very successful, but we must also recognize the fact that in Malaysia, we still do not see enough Dayak representation in board of directors, right? In politicians, right? In CEOs of companies, in leadership positions as well. We do talk a lot about Bumi Putra, which is the First Nation in general, but it's very skewed to the Malays, and the Dayaks and the Orang Asli or the Orang Asal are almost drowned in those narratives, and it is our collective responsibility to give them that opportunity to rise up as well. That's one reminder. The other good reminder that Jen gave is that every now and then we do all need to just take a step back and look at the thing, at a larger picture, and be honest with ourselves, right? Don't trust all the narratives that's being fed to us by government propaganda or even, what the general communities are saying. Let's look at things in an objective manner and be open to sometimes the hard truth that we have to have conversation about, especially. Maybe just in the last, we're over time now, but maybe quickly, I know Jen wants to hear, Jen loves hearing from other young people, especially what they do. So maybe quickly, let's have a few of you guys introduce yourself, especially some of the work that you do. Maybe Rushdie, you want to tell us a bit about House, because given that you're probably the one that is most different to everyone here.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Johan. I don't know what to make of that introduction, but my name is Rushdie, and I'm involved with an organization called House Coaching. When we set up in 2016, what we had set out to do was to add to the event calendar in Kuching, where it was really sleepy. There was nothing happening, so to speak, besides these huge conventions that would happen once or twice a year. So we started small. We consulted the local communities, and then we founded House from the ground up with the community ready for that kind of dedication to contributing to the creative scene. And we managed to take over an abandoned building for a year and a half. And over that year and a half, we executed about 80 plus events within that span. And, actively trying to squash that misconception that coaching is boring or there's nothing. And we wanted to show that it's all about the people and other people willing to come together and provide for what other people want to see and want to participate in. And along that road, we also tried to target accessibility into arts education, art programs, and try to provide space and programming partnership opportunities for grassroots communities to try out doing their first exhibition, first workshop, and also in that process, gain a sustainable advantage in earning back from these workshops at nominal fees. So it was about balancing sustaining the creative community by providing these financially, not really rewarding, but sustainable opportunities, as well as providing the public with low entry rates and also having various art programs in one space, whereas previously you had to go to different places to participate in music, participate in visual arts, even if that existed at all. And here we are today in our third revitalized abandoned building, and it's really scaled. And I was going to share privately with you, Jen, because you asked, what are you guys thinking? We are past that, passion phase, so to speak, not to say that we've fallen out of love with the project, but rather it has grown like a child, and it has different needs now, and it's basically a teenager. And, with that, there's laptops to buy the kid. There's also a university to send it to. So the expenses are really growing, and the executive force is not necessarily growing parallel to that. And but we are tapping into funding opportunities, and we have been able to get a few grants to keep us going here and there. And yeah, we're able to make our monthly, and yeah, we're just hoping to do more. We managed to diversify our programs to digital because of the pandemic, but even then, it's pretty slow. And I have so much more to say, but I'll stop there.
I think, and also I think you didn't go into details of how house was very crucial in the very beginning, creating a space, especially for artists, because in Malaysia artists receive almost no support at all. Prior to 2018, I think, when the Cendana was set up, there was no support whatsoever for artists, and house were really community groups, grassroots, who got together, took over an abandoned building, did the painting, all the renovation, everything themselves, created a platform for people to come jam together, for artists to come and experiment, for people who draw murals and graffiti to do their art in a safe space and a safe manner, for them to learn from each other when there is no design art education or any form of formal art education, and no one was really doing that either to create that platform for artists. And house really did everything with no support, and everything from community driven and the ground up as well. So that was, to me, that's incredible. Maybe Jimmy, do you want to? No problem. Jacob, do you want to tell us a bit about Tegas, maybe? And you went from being an entrepreneur, fell, and then joined an enabler.
Yeah. So basically, Tegas, we are an organization. We're funded by the state government. But the advantage that we have is that we're independent. We have a bit of freedom to move around. We accelerate and we support generally a large scope of enterprises and startups, and so we don't really limit ourselves in that. We do help social enterprises and normal startups, profit startups. We also provide them with office spaces and company incorporations, boot camps. We run a few programs also to help educate them. It's also a way of them to network with each other, to get introduced to the whole startup ecosystem here in Sarawak. We also enable them to reach. We are basically part of a government initiative to digitalize Sarawak. So yeah, not much to say because I'm quite new also to the team. But we have a few other hubs. Some of our other teammates are here also, like Hamza is in Miri. And Noor Shakina, she's in Bintulu, another city in Sarawak. So we're quite spread out a bit. We have a lot of people here and there. But I think like the main problem that we have right now, especially during the pandemic, is outreach, because we do want to help those who are in the rural areas also who do not have internet. But it's a bit hard if we're limited in our movement and we can't cross borders and stuff like that. I guess our short dream is to also tap into the social enterprise side of things, because up till now, I think we have been focusing more on the profit side of things. We want to, learn how can we make these social enterprises sustainable. They don't need to make millions, but at least we want them to be able to survive long enough to help more people and to grow. Yeah, but I don't know. What about my other teammates? Hamza, do you want to add anything to that?
I'm sure we're limited by time, so maybe
Oh, okay, all
quickly,
right, yeah. Okay,
maybe,
just keep it short and sweet.
yeah, because we're very over time. But just quickly, maybe the last one. Speaking of digitizing Sarawak, Ellie, do you want to talk about SDAG? Just by context, Benny and Jen, Ellie used to be my intern, and later on joined Grab, which is probably the largest startup now in Asia Pacific. And now it's with SDAG, Sarawak Digital Economy Corporation.
Thank you, Ihon. But I think I'll pass this to Atika because she has an ongoing project regarding social entrepreneurship as well. So I'd like to hear more about that.
Atika.
Thanks for passing that mic to me, Ali. Hi, everyone. I'm Tika from Sarawak Digital Economy Corporation. A bit of background about us. We're a government-owned agency that offers all sorts of services for the ecosystem. This being program coordination, funding, networking, product development, and commercialization. And we encompasses multiple verticals. These verticals being tech startups, artisans, creatives, etc. So my area of responsibilities are mainly in developing and supporting social enterprise ecosystem in Malaysia and to encourage their digital enablement. Currently, what Ellie mentioned, I am working on developing a blueprint for the ecosystem players in Sarawak to support social enterprise or social entrepreneurs. Basically, this blueprint will highlight on the challenges and how to address these challenges and what sort of roles each agencies or each ecosystem players in Sarawak can play in addressing, and how do we close the gap that's currently in the social enterprise ecosystem right now.
Thank you, Tika. I'm aware of time, so I won't keep Jen or Benny much longer.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
When you say close the gap, can you just go into that a little bit more?
One of the biggest challenges is among social enterprise in Malaysia in general is that we don't have a legal structure, a specific legal structure that defines the business model in social enterprise. So ideally, social enterprise would be, let's say, they should be eligible for tax deduction, things like that. But at the moment, there is no specific legal setup for that. So agencies like the policymakers, when we outline these problems and then we put it in the blueprint, so these things can be referred and reviewed by people like the government agencies and policymakers, and they can see what they can do about it.
Yeah, okay, understand. Yeah, we've exactly had that exact same problem here. And it's still going on. We just kind of, everyone's just found ways around things. We wanted a very specific social enterprise, and we still don't have what, for instance, in Scotland and the UK that they have. But yeah, everyone's just ignored it and just got on with the work. It was like how we used to argue about what the definition of social enterprise is for about 10 years. And then we just said, who cares? Let's just get on and do the work. So, yeah.
That's right. I just to throw out there, there are so many different legal models that you can adopt for social enterprise, from co-ops to employee-owned businesses to non-profits to private partnerships. And one of the things that we really had to do early on was bring more education into the space around those various models and what the benefits are, because it really depends on the particular kind of need you're trying to address and also the kind of governance structure that you want as to what you will adopt. And most people are not familiar with the variety of different forms that social enterprise can take. So, and then there's other things like layers on top of that, like B corporations, which are becoming increasingly important as ways for private businesses to demonstrate their purpose and their operations as social businesses.
So if you leave me, Jen and Benny together, I think we can talk for hours and hours.
No doubt.
But really, really, really good to catch up, especially Jen. I haven't seen you since New Zealand when we were at the Social Enterprise World Forum. And, you know, I really miss the time that we had. And thank you so much for all the mentorship, for all the very generous advice and wisdom that you've given, you know, as when I started my first business, you know, with my co-founder, although credit to my co-founder, he started everything. I just joined. Brad during Hub Australia days. Jen was also one of our wisdom counsel, provided us with a lot of wisdom. And subsequently, Jen really, you know, helped me with all the subsequent work that I do. Jen has always been there until today. You know, it's been more than 10 years now, and Jen continued to be my mentor, my guidance, my everything, you know, when it comes to social innovation, social entrepreneurship. So Jen, thank you so much. Benny has been a great friend, you know, and since, you know, I've known Benny I think because of SSE, and when we were doing Hub Australia, and you know, Benny, you have been a great friend and a great, you know, just a great person to bounce ideas with and share ideas, and being able to just be critical with each other in a very safe and open manner. And, you know, and you're always about making sure that we learn and making sure that we get something, you know, out of the conversation. And yeah, I really, truly appreciate, you know, you guys taking time off to share with us, and very generously, and also at the same time, yeah, gave us everything that you can in this very short, actually very long panel discussion, actually. So Jen and Benny, thank you so much.
Thank you. You're very
Thanks,
welcome.
everyone. Thank you
love
so
you.
much. Thank you, Eon. You're a legend.
Yes.
You're a legend too.
We're gonna
You're a
take a
legend, Eon.
picture.
He's a huge legend.
Don't leave yet. We're gonna take a picture.
Okay.
Okay. All right, you all, if you can turn on your camera, or you can also put up your reaction so it looks more lively this session.
Oh yeah.
Ready? 1, 2. Oops, wrong button. 1, 2, 3. Amazing. Cool. Got it.
Thanks, everyone. Good luck in all your work. I'm really sorry we didn't get to talk to you all for hours, and you just had to listen to us, because I would like to hear everyone's story here. I'm very curious. So
one
Eon,
day
maybe we'll get another go where you all get to talk and we listen. That would be great. I would love that.
We'll fly you to Sarawak one day. We go into the rainforest and we'll have a retreat there.
Now we're talking. Thanks, everyone. Good luck with your work. Thank you for what you're doing, all of you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Stay well. And case everything. Yes, got it.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Benny.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.